We would all like to think that every criminal and killer gets what they deserve and is put away for good, but sometimes that doesn't always happen. Welcome back to Raven's 10s, where I'll be counting down my list on the top 10 horrifying killers still on the loose. Number 10, the Chicago Strangler. Between the years of 2001 and 2018, a string of murders towards sex workers and women with a history of drug addiction rocked the city of Chicago by an unidentified man. It was originally thought to be a racially charged crime when 39 of the 51 victims were African American. That has since been proven not the case. The killer isn't subtle at all, leaving the bodies in public places like vacant lots, abandoned buildings, and alleyways. There's been many theories regarding this bizarre case, from there being 50 different killers to it being a gang initiation. The investigation of finding this killer or killers is ongoing, and this has caused the women of Chicago to constantly look over their shoulder. Number 9. The Flat Tire Murderer. During a 6-month period in 1975, 7 women were murdered in a small Florida town. The killer would deflate his victims' tires while they were gone and then conveniently offer assistance, gaining his victims' trust before kidnapping and later murdering them. The infamous killer Ted Bundy was originally thought to be the portrayer of these heinous murders, but was soon dismissed due to lack of evidence. Despite a thorough investigation, the killer was never apprehended and the murders stopped abruptly. Although there were several theories and possible upwards of 9 or more related deaths, no suspects were ever identified and the case remains unsolved to this day. Number 8. The February 9th Killer. The date February 9th haunts the people of Utah after the 2006 killing of Sonia Mejia and the 2008 killing of Damiana Castillo, both taking place on February 9th of their respective years. Mejia, who was pregnant at the time, was found by her husband in their bedroom, sexually assaulted and strangled to death. A witness that saw someone force himself into Mejia's home has described the person as a Hispanic male in his late teens or early 20s. But even with all the evidence and witnesses, the February 9th killer still seems to elude the police. Until apprehension of this annual killer, February 9th will continue to be a date of fear. Number 7. The Smiley Face Killer. A smiley face isn't associated with only happiness anymore. Since 1997, 300 young boys have been found around the United States dead in a body of water, staged to make it look like a drowning suicide, all with a smiley face drawn near where the bodies were found. The victims were all young, athletic, and academic achievers. They were all reportedly found dead after a night out drinking. The young men were drugged, killed, and dumped into a close body of water. Due to their higher standings, it was believed they were killed based on jealousy towards the upper class. It is believed to be the work of many different people around the country, culminating in a serial killer cult. A docu-film called Smiley Face Killers: The Hunt for Justice is about the killings and theories about the victims, has been released on the Oxygen television network in 2019. No suspects tied to the murders have been apprehended yet. Number 6. The Interstate 70 Killer. During the spring of 1992, 6 store clerks in the Midwest were shot and killed while working their job. His victims were usually young, petite, brunette women. One of the victims was a man, but it is believed that he was mistaken for a woman by the killer, as he often wore a ponytail. All of the stores attacked were specialty stores and were usually only robbed of a few $100s. He is also suspected of shooting 3 more store clerks in Texas during 1993 and 1994, one of whom survived. Police have not publicly identified any suspects, and the case has been classified as a cold case. In 2018, DNA from the body of Neil Falls, a suspected serial killer in Charleston, West Virginia, was tested for positive involvement. Falls lived in Kansas at the time and resembles the identity of the I-70 killer, but so far no conclusive proof has been found as to his responsibility for any of the murders. Number 5. Issei Sagawa. Also known as Pang, Issei Sagawa is a Japanese man who, while attending college in Paris in 1981, killed and cannibalized his classmate Renee Hartfeld. She was invited to dinner at his apartment under the pretext of translating poetry for a school assignment. He planned to kill and eat her, having selected her for her health and beauty, characteristics he felt he lacked. After she arrived, she began reading poetry at a desk with her back to him, He then proceeded to shoot her in the neck with a rifle. He then ate her flesh, putting what he couldn't finish in the fridge. He was later caught by police when he was trying to dispose of the rest of the body. Segawa was deemed legally insane and sentenced to a mental institution where he only resided for 3 years before he checked himself out of the hospital. In the years following, he had been somewhat of a celebrity, being frequently invited to be a guest speaker and commentator on talk shows, mainly in Japan. He still walks the streets today, biding his time of waiting for his next victim. Number 4. The Lanes Angels of Death. As they came to be known, the Lanes Angels of Death were a group of Austrian nurses who murdered at least 49 patients between 1983 and 1989 in Lanes, Vienna. The group killed their victims with overdoses of morphine or by forcing water into their lungs. Investigators criticized the hospital for meeting them with a wall of silence as they attempted to look into a suspicious 1988 death. The aides were caught after a doctor overheard them bragging about their latest murder at a local tavern. All were convicted of multiple murders and sentenced to life. But by 2008, all 4 women have been released from prison due to good behavior. Number 3. Louis von Schoor. A former policeman and security guard, and South Africa's most prolific mass murderer, Louis von Schoor, shot 101 people, killing 39, over the course of several years in 1980s, while working as a hired gun asked to protect white-owned businesses from non-white people during the apartheid era. But he was released from jail after just 12 years, thanks in part to a countrywide sentence-reduced initiative instigated by former President Nelson Mandela. Von Schoor initially said he will never apologize for what he did to the families of the men he had murdered, but eventually said he wanted their forgiveness. Today he runs a farm with his daughters Jane and Amy. Number 2. The Long Island Serial Killer. Also known as the Craigslist Ripper, is a serial killer who is believed to have murdered at least 11 people in the Long Island area. He targets prostitutes who were often contacted via Craigslist and is believed to have been in operation for at least 15 years. The Long Island serial killer dumps the sometimes dismembered bodies of his victims along Ocean Parkway, a 15-mile stretch of highway that traverses Jones Beach Island on Long Island, New York. The killer dumps his victims unburied in thick bushes, often only a few feet from the heavily traveled roadway. Police believe the killer could have knowledge of law enforcement based on the careful planning of the attacks, along with his ability to evade police for over a decade. Number 1. Pedro Lopez. Also known as the Monster of the Andes, Pedro Lopez is a prolific Colombian pedophile and serial killer believed to have murdered over 300 young girls in Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. He is considered by many to be one of the world's most prolific serial killers and rapists. He was captured when he was attempting to lure a young girl from a busy market. On July 31, 1981, a 33-year-old Lopez pled guilty to the murders of 57 girls and was imprisoned in Ambato, where he was officially diagnosed as a sociopath. But because of Ecuador's laws, Lopez only received a maximum sentence of 16 years, much to the public's enormous outrage. Ecuador would later change its maximum prison sentence to 25 years, but by then he was already released. Lopez then vanished, with concerns having risen about his possible connection to a 2002 murder. His whereabouts are currently unknown. Do you agree with my list? What horrifying serial killer keeps you up at night? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time for another terrifying Top 10.